With $8,000 in student loan debt and $300 left in her checking account, Zara Williams is balancing wine glasses and her crumbling dreams when she meets the one man in Seoul who could either save her or destroy her completely. He sees her desperation, recognizes her fire, and when she dares to splash wine on his expensive suit, he does something unexpected. He smiles. At 24, Zara balanced crystal wine glasses with the precision of someone who understood that a single mistake could cost her everything. She moved through the upscale restaurant with practiced grace, her natural hair styled in a sleek protective style that caught the ambient light from the crystal chandeliers. She was beautiful in a way that commanded attention, with warm brown skin, expressive dark eyes, and a quiet strength that showed in the set of her shoulders despite the exhaustion that seemed permanently etched into her features. The Meridian was the kind of establishment where meals cost more than her monthly rent, where the wealthy came to see and be seen. Zara had been working there for 6 months, ever since her art scholarship fell through and reality crashed into her dreams of becoming a gallery curator. The tips were good when she could charm the right tables, and she needed every dollar. $8,000 in loans, $300 in her account, and rent due in 5 days. The mathematics of her survival played constantly in her mind like a countdown she couldn't stop. She was reviewing the wine list when table 7 was seated. 3 men in expensive suits, the kind that whispered wealth and power even in a room full of Seoul's elite. But it was the man at the head of the table who made her pause. Korean, late 30s, with sharp features that looked like they had been carved from granite. His dark hair was swept back perfectly, and his eyes missed nothing as they swept the restaurant with calculated assessment. His suit was black, impeccably tailored, and cost more than she made in 3 months. He wore power like cologne, subtle but unmistakable. Zara approached their table with her professional smile in place, notepad ready. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to the Meridian. Can I start you with something to drink?" The 2 men flanking him ordered quickly, but the man in the center studied her for a long moment before speaking. His English was perfect, accentless. "What do you recommend from your wine selection?" She launched into her practiced description of their featured bottles, a Burgundy that was smooth and complex with notes of dark cherry and earth. As she spoke, she noticed how he watched her, not with the casual dismissal she sometimes encountered, but with genuine attention that made her self-conscious. "And the price?" he asked. 800,001 per bottle, she replied. He leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Expensive for something served by the help. The words hit her like a slap. She had dealt with condescension before, the casual cruelty of people who saw service workers as invisible. But something about his tone, the calculated dismissal, ignited something fierce in her chest. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "Never let anyone make you small, baby girl." Zara's hand tightened on the wine bottle she had brought to show them. The Burgundy was beautiful, deep red like liquid garnets. She thought about her rent, her loans, the careful politeness she maintained to survive. She thought about 800,001 being pocket change to this man while she counted every coin. "You're absolutely right," she said, her voice steady and sweet. "It is expensive for the help to serve." She tilted the bottle slightly, letting the wine splash across his immaculate suit, the deep red spreading across the expensive fabric like a crimson declaration of war. The restaurant seemed to freeze. Conversation stopped. The other patrons turned to stare. Zara's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her chin up, meeting his dark eyes with defiance she couldn't afford but couldn't suppress. His associates half rose from their chairs, hands moving toward their jackets, but he held up one hand, and they froze. The silence stretched taut as a wire. Zara waited for the explosion, the demands for her termination, possibly worse. She had just assaulted one of the wealthiest men in the restaurant. Her life in Seoul was over. Instead, he laughed. It was a genuine sound, rich and surprised, as if she had done something delightful rather than destructive. He looked down at his ruined suit, then back at her, and his smile was sharp as a blade but somehow appreciative. "I deserve that," he said quietly. His voice carried a different quality now, something that might have been respect. "What's your name?" "Zara Williams," she replied, her heart still racing but her voice steady. "I'm Kang Miho." He reached into his jacket, and Zara tensed, but he only pulled out a leather wallet. He placed $500 bills on the table, an amount that made her breath catch. For the wine. And the lesson in respect. She stared at the money, more than she made in a week, enough to cover rent with money left over. But when she looked up, his dark eyes were studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. That's when he noticed her wrist. The sleeve of her uniform had ridden up slightly, revealing the faint yellowing of an old bruise, finger-shaped marks that spoke of desperation beyond money troubles. His expression shifted, became harder, colder, though not toward her. "Rough week," he observed, his voice gentle in a way that didn't match his dangerous appearance. "I'm handling it," she replied automatically, tugging her sleeve down. "I'm sure you are," he said, but his tone suggested he understood exactly what those bruises meant and what kind of handling was required. He stood, his ruined suit somehow making him look more dangerous rather than diminished. "But if you ever decide you need help handling things differently, call me." He placed a business card beside the money, simple black with silver lettering. Just his name and a number, no company, no title. The card felt substantial between her fingers, expensive paper that probably cost more than her hourly wage. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "You don't even know me." His smile was enigmatic, almost sad. "Let's just say I have experience with situations that require careful handling. And you have something rare. Which is the courage to splash wine on a stranger who could ruin your life. Most people wouldn't dare." He nodded to his associates, who dropped money on the table for their drinks and followed him toward the exit. At the doorway, he paused and looked back at her. "The Burgundy was an excellent recommendation, by the way. I'll remember that." Then he was gone, leaving Zara standing beside table 7 with $500, a business card, and the strangest feeling that her life had just changed in ways she couldn't begin to understand. She looked down at the card again, running her thumb over the raised lettering of his name. Kong Miho. No other information, just a name that somehow felt like a promise and a warning wrapped together. The restaurant manager appeared at her elbow, his face pale with concern. "Miss Williams, what happened?" "Mr. Kong is one of our most important customers." She slipped the money and card into her apron pocket, her heart still racing but her mind surprisingly clear. "I recommended the Burgundy," she said. He seemed very satisfied with the service. The manager looked confused but relieved that no complaint had been lodged. The rest of her shift passed in a blur, but she felt the weight of the card in her pocket like a secret, like a door she wasn't sure she was brave enough to open. When she finally made it home to her tiny apartment, she sat on her secondhand couch and stared at the business card, wondering if courage was always supposed to feel this much like stepping off a cliff. The eviction notice was taped to her apartment door when Zara returned from her shift, red letters declaring she had 72 hours to pay 3 months of back rent or face removal. Her hands trembled as she read the amount, $4,800. Even with Kong Miho's unexpected tip, she was still impossibly short. The mathematics of her survival had shifted from difficult to catastrophic overnight. Inside her cramped studio apartment, Zara sat on her second-hand couch and stared at his business card. The paper felt substantial between her fingers, expensive and mysterious. She had spent the entire day trying to convince herself that calling him would be ridiculous, that accepting help from a dangerous stranger was the kind of mistake that destroyed lives. But as she looked around her tiny space, at the easel in the corner holding her half-finished painting and the stack of unpaid bills on her kitchen counter, desperation began to outweigh caution. Her phone rang, interrupting her internal debate. Unknown number. "Miss Williams," a gravelly voice said when she answered. "You owe money." "Time's up. I need more time," she replied, trying to keep the fear from her voice. "I'm working on it." "Working's not paying. Tomorrow night, 10 o'clock, outside your building. Bring what you owe, or we'll discuss other arrangements." The line went dead, leaving Zara staring at her phone with ice in her veins. Other arrangements. She knew what that meant. The kind of arrangements that left women like her disappeared or broken, their debts transferred to men who collected in ways that had nothing to do with money. The next evening found Zara at the Meridian, moving through her shift like a sleepwalker. Every shadow seemed threatening, every customer's face potentially dangerous. When she saw Kong Miho enter the restaurant alone and take his usual table, she felt a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. He was dressed in another perfectly tailored suit, this one charcoal gray that made his dark eyes look almost black. His presence seemed to shift the entire atmosphere of the restaurant, conversations becoming more subdued, staff moving with extra precision. When she approached his table, he looked up from his phone and studied her face with those penetrating eyes. "You look like you didn't sleep," he observed. "Busy night ahead," she replied, trying for lightness but hearing the strain in her own voice. The kind of busy that requires careful handling. She met his gaze, remembering his words from the night before. Something in his expression told her he already knew about her situation, had perhaps known before he ever walked into the Meridian. The realization should have frightened her, but instead it felt oddly comforting. Here was a man who understood dangerous situations and had offered help. "Maybe," she said quietly. He nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "What time does your shift end?" 10:30. "I'll wait." The rest of her shift crawled by with agonizing slowness. When 10:30 finally arrived, Zara changed out of her uniform with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. She had two choices: meet the loan sharks and hope for mercy she knew wouldn't come, or trust the mysterious Korean man who had left a $500 tip and a business card. She chose the devil she didn't know. Kong Miho was waiting in the restaurant's parking lot, leaning against a sleek black sedan that probably cost more than her annual salary. When he saw her emerge from the employee entrance, he straightened and opened the passenger door. "Get in," he said. "We're going to resolve your problem." "How do you know about my problem?" she asked, but she was already moving toward the car. "Men who collect debts the way yours do tend to be loud about it. Word travels in certain circles." The interior of his car was leather and luxury, the kind of space where important decisions were made and dangerous business conducted. As they drove through Seoul's neon-lit streets, Zara found herself studying his profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the controlled way he handled the wheel. Everything about him spoke of precision and power. They parked outside her apartment building just as three men emerged from a dark van. Even from a distance, Zara could see they were not the type to negotiate reasonably. Her heart hammered against her ribs as memories of previous encounters flooded back. The grabbing, the threats, the casual violence of men who saw her as commodity rather than person. "Stay in the car," Miho said, his voice taking on a quality she hadn't heard before. Cold, authoritative, dangerous. But she watched through the windshield as he approached the three men. The conversation was brief, conducted in low voices that didn't carry. She saw him remove something from his jacket, not a weapon, but what looked like a phone, showing them something on the screen. Whatever they saw made them step back. Words were exchanged, sharp and final. Then the men returned to their van and drove away. Miho walked back to the car, his expression unchanged, as if he had just conducted routine business rather than eliminating a threat that had terrorized her for weeks. "It's handled," he said as he slid back into the driver's seat. "They won't return." "What did you show them?" "Documentation that your debt has been transferred to me, along with information about what happens to people who interfere with my property." "Your property." Poor choice of words. "My responsibility." He drove them through Seoul's upscale district, past buildings that reached toward the sky like glass and steel monuments to wealth. When they arrived at his building, a doorman appeared instantly to park the car. The elevator required a key card and rose smoothly to the penthouse, where the doors opened directly into his apartment. Zara stepped into a space that redefined her understanding of luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Seoul's glittering skyline. The furniture was minimalist but clearly expensive, leather and dark wood and clean lines. Original artwork hung on the walls, pieces she recognized from her art history classes, paintings worth more than most people made in a lifetime. The sense of wealth and power permeated every surface, making her tiny apartment seem like a closet in comparison. "Sit," he said, gesturing toward a leather sofa positioned to take advantage of the view. "We need to discuss your situation." Zara perched on the edge of the couch, acutely aware of the disparity between her second-hand clothes and the opulent surroundings. Miho poured himself a glass of what looked like expensive whiskey and settled into the chair across from her. "Your debt was $8,000, plus interest and fees. I've purchased it for $15,000. Consider it an investment." "An investment in what?" "You. Your skills. Your potential." She stared at him, trying to understand what he was proposing. I'm a waitress with an art degree. What possible value could I have to someone like you? His smile was slight, but genuine. You have a degree in art history from Seoul National University. You speak 3 languages fluently. You have an eye for quality and the courage to act on your convictions. And you understand what it means to fight for survival. How do you know all that? I make it my business to know about people who interest me. And you, Zara Williams, are very interesting. He leaned forward, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. I have a proposition for you. $150,000 per year to serve as my personal art consultant and cultural advisor. You would live here, in the guest wing, with your own studio space. You would curate my collection, accompany me to galleries and cultural events, help me navigate situations requiring someone with your background and education. She felt her breath catch. $150,000 was more money than she had ever imagined having. It was freedom from debt, from the constant anxiety of survival, from the exhausting mathematics of poverty. But nothing came without a price, especially not for men who could make loan sharks disappear with a phone call. What would you expect in return? She asked carefully. Absolute loyalty. Complete discretion about my business affairs. Your presence when I require it. Your expertise when I request it. And your word that you understand the nature of this arrangement. Which is, you would be under my protection. That protection extends to your physical safety, your financial security, and your freedom to pursue your artistic interests. But protection comes with responsibilities. You would be part of my world, and my world has rules. Zara's mind raced through the implications. She would be trading her independence for security, her freedom for protection. But what freedom did she have sleeping on a couch in a studio apartment, dodging debt collectors, and working double shifts just to survive? What independence was there in desperation? And if I say no, then I drive you home, your debts remain paid, and we never speak again. The choice is entirely yours. She looked around the penthouse again, at the art that spoke to her soul, at the view that made Seoul look like a city of possibilities rather than obstacles. She thought about her easel in the corner of her tiny apartment, about the dreams she had deferred and the security she had never known. Why me, she asked. Why not hire someone already established in the art world? Because established people in the art world don't understand what it means to risk everything for survival. They don't have your hunger, your appreciation for opportunity, your willingness to fight when fighting matters. And because when you splashed wine on my suit, you showed me something I don't often see, which is integrity that can't be bought. You risked your job to stand up for your dignity. That's rare. Zara closed her eyes, feeling the weight of decision settling over her like a heavy coat. She could return to her apartment, pack her few belongings, and disappear into whatever safety $150,000 could buy elsewhere. Or she could step forward into this dangerous, luxurious world and hope that Kong Miho's protection was worth the price of her independence. I accept, she said, opening her eyes to meet his gaze. But I need to understand the rules. His smile was sharp with satisfaction and something that might have been relief. The rules are simple. You belong to this world now, which means you belong to me. I protect what's mine, absolutely, and without compromise. In return, you give me your loyalty and your trust. Nothing more, nothing less. The way he said mine sent a shiver down her spine that was equal parts fear and something else she didn't want to examine too closely. She was trading one form of captivity for another. But this captivity came with luxury, purpose, and the protection of a man who could make problems disappear with a phone call. When do I start? She asked. Now, he said, rising from his chair. I'll have someone collect your belongings tomorrow. Tonight, you rest, and tomorrow we begin building your new life. 3 months after moving into Kong Miho's penthouse, Zara Williams no longer recognized the woman who had served wine in a cramped restaurant uniform. She stood in her private art studio, morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows as she put finishing touches on a canvas that captured Seoul's skyline in bold strokes of indigo and gold. The space was hers completely, equipped with professional easels, premium paints, and everything she had dreamed of during those exhausting double shifts at the Meridian. Her reflection in the studio's mirror showed a woman transformed. Designer clothes that fit perfectly, her natural hair styled in elegant protective styles that spoke of salon visits rather than late-night maintenance sessions. She had gained weight in the healthy way of someone who no longer worried about choosing between groceries and rent. But the most significant change was in her eyes, which held a confidence she had never possessed when every day was a battle for survival. The morning routine had become comfortable, almost domestic. She would paint until 8, then join Miho in the dining room for coffee and breakfast. He was always impeccably dressed, even at 7 in the morning, reading financial reports while his housekeeper served fresh fruit and pastries that cost more than Zara's former weekly grocery budget. Their conversations had evolved from careful politeness to genuine intellectual exchange. "Good morning," he said as she entered the dining room, not looking up from his tablet, but somehow aware of her presence. "How is the Skyline series progressing?" "Almost finished," she replied, settling into what had become her chair across from him. "I want to submit 3 pieces to the Emerging Artists exhibition at the National Museum." He glanced up, his dark eyes holding approval that sent a warm flutter through her chest. "Excellent choice. The curator there owes me a favor. I want them to accept my work on its merit, not your influence," she said firmly. His smile was sharp with something that might have been pride. "Of course, but having connections doesn't diminish talent. It simply ensures talent gets the attention it deserves." It was the kind of pragmatic wisdom that had taken her weeks to understand. In Miho's world, everything was about leverage, relationships, strategic advantage. But she had learned he wielded his power carefully, never crushing what could be cultivated instead. Their days had settled into patterns that felt surprisingly natural. Mornings were hers for painting. Afternoons often involved gallery visits or meetings with artists whose work Miho was considering for his expanding collection. She had discovered he had remarkable taste, drawn to pieces that challenged conventional beauty while maintaining emotional depth. Her recommendations had resulted in several acquisitions that now graced the penthouse walls, including 2 of her own paintings displayed with the same reverence given to established masters. The test had come in her second month, so subtle she almost missed it. A small Monet sketch had appeared on her studio desk, a study for one of his water lily series worth more than most people's houses. No explanation, no instructions, just the priceless drawing left casually where she might think it forgotten. She had found Miho in his office that evening, the sketch in her hands. "This was on my desk," she said, offering it to him. He looked up from his computer, expression neutral. "Was it? It's worth at least $2 million. It shouldn't be left lying around. Perhaps someone was careless." She studied his face, understanding suddenly that this was evaluation rather than accident. "You left it there deliberately." His slight smile confirmed her suspicion. "I needed to understand what kind of person you are when no one is watching." "And what kind of person am I?" "The kind who returns priceless art instead of disappearing with it. The kind worth investing in." The incident had shifted something between them, a deepening of trust that allowed for more honest conversation. She began challenging his artistic choices, pointing out when his taste leaned too heavily towards safe, traditional pieces. He valued her perspective in ways that surprised them both. "You have an eye for artists before they become celebrated," he told her one evening as they reviewed portfolio submissions. "That's a rare gift." Their cultural exchange had become one of her favorite aspects of their arrangement. She introduced him to African-American artists whose work explored themes of identity and resilience, pieces that spoke to struggles he was beginning to understand through her stories of growing up as an outsider in spaces that weren't designed for her success. In return, he shared Korean traditions that went deeper than the surface politeness most foreigners encountered, teaching her to read the subtle hierarchies and unspoken communications that governed his business world. "You bow slightly when meeting gallery directors," he explained before a particularly important opening. "Not submission, but acknowledgement of their position. Koreans appreciate respect for expertise. And when they dismiss me because I'm not what they expected, then you speak about art with such knowledge and passion that they forget their preconceptions and remember why they became curators in the first place." He had been right, as usual. His understanding of human psychology was as sharp as his business instincts, and he had begun teaching her to read people the way he did, to understand motivations and fears that others kept hidden. But it was the quiet moments that revealed the most about him. Late evenings when she would find him standing at the windows, staring out at the city with an expression of profound solitude. The insomnia he tried to hide, emerging from his bedroom at 3 in the morning to work or read because sleep brought dreams he wouldn't discuss. She had learned to recognize the signs of his nightmares, the tension that would grip his shoulders, the way his jaw would tighten when memories surfaced unbidden. She began leaving tea outside his office during those sleepless nights, never mentioning it, but knowing he found the small comfort in the gesture. He started requesting her company during late evening calls with international partners, claiming he needed her cultural insights, but really, she suspected, needing the grounding presence of someone who saw him as human rather than force of nature. The physical awareness had crept up on them both like dawn, so gradual they were fully illuminated before realizing the darkness had lifted. Accidental touches when reaching for the same book, his hand steadying her elbow when she stumbled slightly in new heels, the way his eyes would linger on her face when he thought she wasn't looking. Her pulse would quicken when he leaned close to examine a painting she was discussing, his expensive cologne mixing with the scent of her paints in ways that made her thoughts scatter. "You have paint in your hair," he mentioned one evening, his voice softer than usual. "Occupational hazard," she replied, reaching up to find the smudge of blue. "Allow me," he said, stepping closer to carefully extract the dried paint from her curls. His fingers were gentle, precise, and the simple contact sent electricity down her spine. Their eyes met as he dropped the paint flake, neither stepping away from the proximity that had become charged with possibility. She could see herself reflected in his dark pupils, could feel the warmth of his breath on her forehead. For a moment, the careful boundaries of their arrangement seemed gossamer thin. "Thank you," she whispered. His hand moved to cup her cheek, thumb brushing across her skin with reverent care. "Zara," he said, her name carrying weight she had never heard before. The moment stretched between them, full of questions neither was ready to ask and answers that could change everything. Then his phone rang, shattering the spell, and he stepped back with professional composure restored so quickly she wondered if she had imagined the tenderness in his touch. "I should take this," he said, but his eyes remained on her face for several seconds longer than necessary. "Of course," she replied, her voice steadier than her pulse. As he answered his phone in rapid Korean, Zara retreated to her studio, her cheeks still warm where his hand had been. She stared at her reflection in the window, seeing a woman who was no longer the desperate waitress who had splashed wine on a stranger's suit. This woman wore designer clothes and created art in a penthouse studio. This woman was protected by one of Seoul's most powerful men and valued for her mind as much as her circumstances. But she was also a woman falling for a man whose world was built on foundations she was only beginning to understand, whose gentleness with her contrasted sharply with the cold efficiency she sometimes glimpsed when he conducted business. She was living in luxury that felt increasingly like home, cared for by someone whose touches were becoming less protective and more possessive with each passing day. 3 months ago, she had been drowning in debt and desperation. Now she was floating in a sea of silk and safety, but she could feel currents beneath the surface pulling her toward depths she wasn't sure she was ready to explore. The question was no longer whether she would sink or swim, but whether she was brave enough to dive deeper into whatever Kang Mi-ho was offering beyond protection and professional opportunity. Standing in her art studio surrounded by canvases that captured the beauty and complexity of her new life, Zara realized that somewhere between the morning coffee conversations and the late-night tea offerings, between the gallery openings and the stolen moments of almost intimacy, she had stopped thinking of their arrangement as temporary. This penthouse had become home. This life had become hers. And the dangerous, complex man who had rescued her from debt collectors and given her back her dreams had become something she was afraid to name but could no longer imagine living without. The transformation was complete, but the story was just beginning. The invitation came on a Thursday evening, delivered not through words, but through Mi-ho's presence in her studio as she cleaned her brushes. He stood silhouetted against the Seoul skyline, hands in his pockets, watching her with an expression that held more weight than their usual evening conversations. The late afternoon light caught the sharp lines of his profile, emphasizing the controlled tension that seemed to live permanently in his shoulders. "Would you join me for wine tonight?" he asked, his voice carrying a formality that felt deliberate. "I have a bottle I've been saving for the right occasion." "What's the occasion?" she replied, setting down her brushes and turning to face him fully. Honesty, he said simply. An hour later, Zara found herself in a room she had never entered before, Miho's private library tucked away behind his office like a secret sanctuary. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls, filled with volumes in Korean, English, and Japanese. A fireplace dominated the 4th wall, flames casting dancing shadows across leather armchairs positioned for intimate conversation. The space felt deeply personal in a way the rest of the penthouse did not, a glimpse into the man behind the immaculate suits and calculated control. He had changed from his business attire into dark slacks and a simple black sweater that somehow made him look more dangerous rather than casual. The wine he poured was older than she was, a Bordeaux that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, served in crystal glasses that caught the firelight like liquid rubies. "This room is beautiful," she said, settling into one of the leather chairs and accepting the wine. "How long have you lived here?" 5 years, he replied, taking the chair across from her. "I bought this place after my sister died." The statement hung in the air between them, simple and devastating. Zara felt her breath catch, understanding suddenly that they had crossed a threshold from which there would be no retreat. This was the vulnerability he had hinted at, the wound that explained the shadows she sometimes glimpsed behind his controlled exterior. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "You've never mentioned her before." Miho stared into his wine for a long moment before speaking, his voice taking on a quality she had never heard before, rough with barely contained emotion. "Minjun was 3 years younger than me. Sweet, kind, everything good in a world that's mostly dark. She believed people were fundamentally decent, that love could overcome any obstacle. I used to tease her about being naive, about seeing the world through rose-colored glasses." He paused, taking a sip of wine that seemed more about buying time than enjoying the vintage. "She met a man when she was 22. Park Jae-woo. He seemed perfect on the surface, educated, well-mannered, from a good family. Everything our parents wanted for her. He courted her properly, brought flowers, took her to nice restaurants, treated her like a princess." Zara felt ice forming in her stomach as she recognized the pattern, the careful setup that preceded destruction. "By the time we realized what was happening, it was too late," Miho continued, his knuckles white where they gripped the wine glass. He isolated her slowly, convinced her that her family didn't understand their love, that we were trying to control her. She stopped coming to family dinners, stopped answering my calls. When I did see her, she was always tired, nervous, making excuses for bruises that were becoming harder to hide. His voice cracked slightly on the last word, and Zara felt tears prick her eyes for a young woman she had never met but understood completely. "I was building my empire then, focused on expanding operations, making deals, accumulating power. I told myself she was an adult who could make her own choices. I convinced myself that love was complicated and families sometimes had to respect boundaries even when they disagreed with decisions. I was too proud and too busy to push harder, to force the conversation she didn't want to have." Miho set down his wine glass and leaned forward, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight like shards of obsidian. "She called me on a Tuesday night in March. 3 in the morning, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her words. She said she was ready to leave him, that she needed my help, that she was scared he would kill her if he found out she was planning to run." The silence that followed was heavy with anticipation of tragedy, and Zara found herself holding her breath. "I told her to meet me the next evening at our old family restaurant, somewhere public and safe. I had security arranged, a safe house prepared, legal papers ready to file. But she never showed up. Park Jae-woo killed her that afternoon, made it look like a car accident, but the autopsy revealed the truth. Blunt force trauma consistent with domestic violence. She had been planning to leave, and somehow he knew." Miho's voice broke completely on the last sentence. Years of guilt and rage and grief condensed into words that seemed inadequate for the weight they carried. Zara set down her own wine and moved to kneel beside his chair, her hands covering his where they rested on his knees. "I couldn't save her," he whispered, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking. "I had all this power, all these resources, and I couldn't save the one person who mattered most. I failed her completely." "It wasn't your fault," Zara said softly, her heart breaking for the pain she could see etched into every line of his face. You couldn't have known what he would do. I should have known, he replied fiercely. I should have seen the signs earlier, pushed harder, acted faster. I should have understood that men like him don't let women go easily. My sister died because I was too focused on building my empire to notice she was being destroyed by the man who claimed to love her. He looked up at her then, his eyes wet with unshed tears, and she saw him completely stripped of the armor he wore to navigate his dangerous world. This was the wound that drove his protective instincts, the guilt that had shaped him into someone who eliminated threats before they could manifest into tragedy. When I saw those bruises on your wrist that night at the restaurant, Miho continued, his voice steadier now, but no less intense. It was like seeing Minjun all over again. Another strong, beautiful woman being slowly destroyed by someone who was supposed to protect her. I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't let history repeat itself. Zara felt understanding dawn like sunrise, illuminating motivations she had never fully grasped. You saved me because you couldn't save her. I saved you because you deserved to be saved, he corrected gently. But yes, part of it was about Minjun. I needed to prove to myself that I could recognize the signs this time, that I could act quickly enough to make a difference. She reached up to cup his face, feeling the stubble rough against her palm, seeing herself reflected in his dark eyes. Thank you for telling me, for trusting me with her memory. His hand covered hers, holding it against his cheek with desperate tenderness. You give me something I thought I'd lost forever when she died. You make me feel like maybe I'm not entirely a monster. You're not a monster, Zara said firmly. You're someone who was hurt deeply and chose to use that pain to protect others instead of becoming the thing that hurt you. It was her turn to be vulnerable now, to offer something of herself in exchange for the gift of his trust. My father left when I was 8, she said quietly. Just walked out one morning and never came back. No explanation, no goodbye, no contact ever again. My mother worked 3 jobs trying to keep us afloat, and I learned early that the people who claim to love you can disappear without warning. Miho's thumb stroked across her knuckles, encouraging her to continue. I've spent most of my adult life building walls, keeping people at arm's length because abandonment was safer than attachment. When you offered to help me, every instinct I had screamed that it was too good to be true, that you would disappear the moment I started depending on you. But you stayed anyway, he observed. I stayed because for the first time in my life, someone saw me drowning and threw me a lifeline instead of swimming away. You didn't just save me from debt collectors, Miho. You saved me from a future where I would have had to compromise pieces of myself just to survive. The space between them had somehow diminished during their conversation, and Zara realized she was now close enough to see flecks of gold in his dark eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. His free hand moved to tangle gently in her hair, and she felt her pulse quicken at the reverent way he touched her. Zara, he murmured, her name carrying a weight of longing that made her breath catch. Yes, she whispered, understanding the question he wasn't quite asking. When his lips met hers, it was with a tenderness that surprised them both. Soft, careful, as if he was afraid she might disappear if he held too tightly. She kissed him back with equal gentleness, tasting wine and vulnerability and the salt of tears neither had realized they were crying. This was not the claiming kiss of a powerful man taking what he wanted, but the careful communion of 2 wounded people choosing to trust each other with their most fragile places. When they broke apart, Miho rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. I didn't plan this, he said softly. Neither did I, she replied. But I'm not sorry it happened. His smile was soft, genuine, transformed by happiness in a way she had never seen before. Neither am I. They might have spent the rest of the evening exploring this new dimension of their relationship, but Miho's phone rang with the sharp insistence of urgency. He glanced at the screen, and his expression shifted instantly back to the controlled alertness she recognized as his business mode. I need to take this, he said apologetically, answering with a crisp greeting in Korean. Zara watched his face change as he listened, saw the muscle in his jaw tighten, observed the way his free hand clenched into a fist. When he ended the call, his eyes had gone cold in a way that made her suddenly aware of how dangerous he really was. What's wrong? She asked, already knowing she wouldn't like the answer. Someone has been asking questions about you. Following you to galleries, photographing you with telephoto lenses, making inquiries about your relationship to me. My security team has identified 3 separate surveillance attempts in the past week. Fear crept up her spine like ice water. The debt collectors you scared away, they're back. Not them specifically, but the organization behind them. Apparently, eliminating your debt was seen as interference in their business model. They've allied with a rival family. People who view my protection of you as weakness they can exploit. Miho stood and moved to the window, his posture rigid with controlled fury. I had hoped paying off your debt would be the end of it, but I underestimated how personal they would take the slight. By bringing you into my world, I've made you a target. What does that mean? She asked, though she suspected she already knew. It means the protection I've provided isn't just luxury anymore, Zara. It's necessity. There are people who would use you to hurt me, and they won't hesitate to cause you pain in the process. The evening that had begun with wine and vulnerability had shifted into something darker, more dangerous. As Zara looked at Miho silhouetted against the Seoul skyline, she realized that crossing the threshold from protection to love meant accepting that her safety was now permanently intertwined with his wars. The kiss they had shared was not just the beginning of something beautiful, but the signing of a contract written in blood and sealed with the promise that whatever came next, they would face it together. She had thought the most dangerous thing about Kang Miho was the way he made her feel safe. Now she understood that the truly dangerous thing was how much she was willing to risk to keep feeling that way. The attack came at dawn, when Seoul skyline was painted in shades of rose and gold, when Zara was standing in her studio mixing colors for a new painting and Miho was in his office reviewing security reports that had arrived too late to matter. The penthouse's sophisticated alarm system detected the breach 3 floors below, but by then armed men were already moving through the building with the precision of a military operation designed to extract one specific target. Zara heard the first gunshot as a sharp crack that echoed through the building's steel and glass structure, followed immediately by the wail of multiple alarm systems activating throughout the penthouse. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she dropped her paintbrush, the color bleeding across her palette like spilled blood. Through her studio windows, she could see black SUVs positioned around the building's perimeter, blocking all escape routes with tactical efficiency. The intercom in her studio crackled to life with Miho's voice, calm but edged with deadly urgency. Zara, listen carefully. Armed men are in the building. Go to my office immediately. Do not stop for anything. Move now. She ran through the penthouse corridors, her bare feet silent on marble floors as the sound of gunfire grew closer. Behind her, she could hear the systematic destruction of the main security doors, the splintering of wood and metal as whoever was coming for them eliminated every barrier between themselves and their target. When she reached Miho's office, she found him strapping on a shoulder holster over his silk pajamas, his movements economical and practiced in a way that revealed training she had never suspected. How many? She asked, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. 8 confirmed, possibly more. They want you alive, which means they'll try to minimize collateral damage until they have you secured. His dark eyes met hers, and she saw something she had never seen before. Fear not for himself, but for her safety. There's a panic room behind the bookshelf, bulletproof, independently ventilated, satellite communication. You'll be safe there until my security team arrives. What about you? I'll handle this. The office door exploded inward before either could move toward the hidden panic room. 3 men in tactical gear burst through the smoking doorway, automatic weapons trained with professional precision. The leader wore a mask, but his voice carried the casual cruelty of someone accustomed to violence as a business tool. Kang Miho, he said in accented English. Your protection of the girl has cost our organization significant face. Time to return what was taken and pay the interest. Zara felt ice flood her veins as she understood she was not collateral damage but the primary objective. These men had come specifically for her, to use her as leverage against Miho, to punish him for interfering in their business by taking away the thing he had chosen to protect. She's not part of this, Miho said, his voice carrying lethal calm as he slowly raised his hands. Your issue is with me. The leader laughed, a sound devoid of humor. She became part of this when you made her yours. Now she pays the price for your interference. That was when Zara noticed the small red button mounted discreetly beneath Miho's desk, partially hidden, but within her reach if she moved carefully. A silent alarm, probably connected to his security team, definitely their best chance of survival. While the armed men focused on Miho, she edged slightly toward the desk. The leader's attention snapped to her movement. "Stay where you are, girl. Any sudden moves, and we put bullets in him first, then take you anyway." But Zara was no longer the desperate waitress who had once cowered from debt collectors. 3 months of living under Miho's protection had not made her soft, but had given her the security to access courage she had always possessed but could never afford to use. Instead of freezing, she lunged for the alarm button, while simultaneously knocking over a priceless Ming vase that shattered against the floor with explosive sound. Chaos erupted instantly. The lead gunman spun toward her, weapons swinging in her direction, while Miho used the distraction to dive behind his heavy oak desk. Zara slammed her palm down on the red button, just as automatic gunfire began chewing apart the office in sustained bursts that sent with splinters and plaster raining down like deadly snow. She pressed herself against the floor behind a leather armchair, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it over the gunfire, while Miho returned fire from behind his desk with a pistol she hadn't seen him draw. His shots were precise, controlled, each one finding its target with the accuracy of extensive training. 2 of the gunmen dropped within seconds, but more voices echoed from the corridor as reinforcements moved through the penthouse. "Stay down," Miho shouted over the noise, his voice carrying absolute authority even in the middle of a gunfight. But staying down felt like surrender, and Zara had not survived growing up in poverty and fighting her way through college by surrendering when things became difficult. Instead, she began crawling toward the corner where several of Miho's most valuable paintings hung, including the small Monet sketch he had once used to test her honesty. If she was going to die in this room, she was not going to let priceless art be destroyed by stray bullets. "What are you doing?" Miho demanded when he saw her movement. "Protecting your collection," she called back, carefully lifting a Picasso drawing from the wall and sliding it beneath a heavy metal filing cabinet for protection. The gunfire paused as the remaining attacker reloaded, and in that brief silence they could hear the distinctive sound of helicopters approaching fast. Miho's security team, responding to the silent alarm with military efficiency. The lead gunman cursed in multiple languages, realizing his tactical advantage was disappearing. "Time to go," he snarled into a radio headset. "Package acquisition failed. Execute secondary protocol." Secondary protocol meant killing everyone and leaving, eliminating witnesses to an operation that had gone sideways. Zara saw the shift in his posture as he prepared for a final assault, and she understood with crystal clarity that the next 60 seconds would determine whether she lived or died. Miho must have seen the same calculation because he rose from behind his desk, pistol trained with unwavering precision on the gunman's center mass. His face had transformed into something she had never seen before, cold and merciless, stripped of every trace of the gentle man who had kissed her in his library the night before. "You made a mistake coming for her," he said, his voice carrying promise of retribution that made the gunman take an involuntary step backward. The final exchange lasted less than 10 seconds. The gunman fired wildly as he attempted to retreat toward the destroyed doorway. Miho's response was 2 precisely placed shots that ended the threat permanently. Then silence fell over the office like a heavy blanket, broken only by the approaching sound of tactical helicopters and the distant wail of sirens. Zara remained motionless behind the overturned chair for several seconds, her body shaking with adrenaline and shock, before Miho's voice broke through her paralysis. "Zara, it's over. You can come out now." She stood on unsteady legs, looking around the destroyed office where 3 men lay dead and bullet holes decorated the walls like violent art. Miho was already holstering his weapon, his face returning to human expression as he moved toward her with swift, urgent steps. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his hands moving over her arms and shoulders, checking for injuries with gentle efficiency. She shook her head, not trusting her voice, still processing that she had just survived a military-style assault by men who had come specifically to kill or kidnap her. When she finally spoke, her voice came out steady despite the tremor running through her body. "I saved the Picasso," she said, pointing toward where she had hidden the drawing. His laugh was half relief, half amazement. You saved priceless art in the middle of a gunfight. Most people would have been curled in a corner screaming. Most people don't live with someone who taught them that valuable things are worth protecting, even when protection is dangerous. Something shifted in his expression, a recognition of what her actions meant beyond simple courage. She had not just survived his world. She had participated in protecting what mattered to him even when her own life was at risk. She had proven herself not just as someone worth saving, but as someone capable of standing beside him when his world turned violent. The penthouse filled with tactical teams over the next hour, Miho's security personnel securing the scene and removing bodies with efficient discretion. Zara sat in an undamaged chair, wrapped in a cashmere throw, while a medic treated a shallow cut on her arm from flying glass. The cut was minor, but Miho had insisted on medical attention, hovering nearby with protective vigilance that would have seemed excessive if not for the 3 bodies being carried past in discreet black bags. When the last of the security team departed, leaving them alone in the damaged office, Miho knelt beside her chair and took her hands in his. His fingers trembled slightly, the first crack in his composure since the attack began. I almost lost you, he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion he had suppressed during the crisis. When I saw those men coming for you, all I could think about was Minjun, about failing again, about not being fast enough or strong enough to protect what matters most. But you didn't fail, Zara replied, squeezing his hands. I'm here. I'm alive. We survived. This time. But there will be others, Zara. This attack was a message, a demonstration that nowhere is completely safe. As long as you're with me, you'll be a target for anyone who wants to hurt me. That's not fair to you. She saw what he was building toward, the offer he was preparing to make out of misguided nobility. Before he could voice it, she slid from the chair to kneel facing him, her hands framing his face so he could not look away. Don't you dare, she said firmly. Don't you dare offer to let me go for my own safety. I just survived armed men trying to kidnap me, and my first thought afterward was protecting your art collection. Does that sound like someone who wants to run away from your world? It sounds like someone too brave for her own good. It sounds like someone who has chosen where she belongs. This is my world now too, Miho. These are my paintings on the walls, my studio upstairs, my life in this penthouse. Those men came for me not because I'm innocent collateral damage, but because I'm yours. And you're mine. His dark eyes searched her face, looking for doubt or fear he could use to justify sending her away. What he found instead was determination that matched his own, strength that had been tested by violence and emerged unbroken. You could have a normal life, he said softly. Safe, quiet, without men with guns breaking down doors. I don't want a normal life. I want this life. I want you, and your dangerous business, and your impossible loyalty, and your gentle hands that can kill when necessary and paint my portrait when we're alone. I want all of it, even knowing what that means, even understanding that violence will always be possible, especially knowing that, because the alternative is going back to being afraid and alone and unprotected. Because you've shown me what it means to have someone willing to kill to keep you safe, and I'm not giving that up. I'm not giving you up. The transformation in his expression was subtle but complete, protective concern shifting into something deeper and more possessive. When he spoke, his voice carried finality that echoed through the damaged office like a vow. You're mine, he said, the words carrying weight of absolute commitment. I protect what's mine, and I don't share. If you stay completely. No reservations, no escape plans, no safety nets I don't provide. And you're mine, she replied without hesitation. All of you. The gentleman who buys me art supplies, and the killer who just put 3 bullets in men who threatened me. I'm not afraid of who you are, Miho. I'm grateful for it. When he kissed her this time, it was not with the careful tenderness of the previous night, but with the fierce possession of someone claiming what belonged to him. She kissed him back with equal intensity, tasting relief and commitment, and the metallic edge of violence survived together. They were no longer a powerful man protecting a vulnerable woman out of guilt and convenience. They were partners who had faced lethal threat together and chosen each other over safety, over normalcy, over any future that did not include the dangerous, passionate, absolutely committed love they had built in the space between protection and possession. As dawn light streamed through the bullet-scarred windows of his office, Zara understood that she had finally found what she had been searching for without realizing: a home worth fighting for and a man worth dying beside. 6 months after bullets shattered the windows of Kong Miho's penthouse office, Zara Williams stood in her own art gallery, watching Seoul's cultural elite examine paintings that had been born from struggle, nurtured by protection, and brought to life by the kind of love that could survive gunfire. The opening night of Origin's gallery was everything she had dreamed of during those exhausting double shifts at the Meridian, but it was also something she could never have imagined: a testament to the power of being seen, protected, and cherished by someone who understood that dreams were worth killing for. The gallery space was perfect, 3,000 square feet in Gangnam's most prestigious arts district, with soaring white walls and precisely calibrated lighting that made each painting glow like a captured moment of divine inspiration. The centerpiece of tonight's exhibition was her Seoul Skyline series, the paintings she had worked on during those first months of learning to live without fear. But surrounding them were works by emerging artists she had discovered and nurtured, voices that might never have been heard without the platform her success had provided. Miho moved through the crowd with the same controlled elegance he brought to everything, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than the average gallery made in a month. But tonight he was not the feared crime boss whose enemies had learned to disappear quietly into Seoul's shadows. Tonight he was simply a man watching the woman he loved receive recognition for talents that had always been extraordinary but had finally been given space to flourish. The threats that had once made her a target were now historical footnotes. The rival organization that had sent armed men to his penthouse had been systematically dismantled over the course of 3 months, their leadership either eliminated or convinced to pursue business opportunities in distant cities where Kang Miho's influence could not reach them. The efficiency with which he had removed every person who had ever considered using her as leverage was both terrifying and deeply romantic, proof that his protection was not just philosophical, but absolutely practical. "Congratulations, Ms. Williams," said the director of the National Museum, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. "Your work captures something essential about Seoul's transformation. The way you balance traditional elements with contemporary urgency is remarkable." "Thank you," she replied, her smile genuine and confident in a way that would have seemed impossible a year ago when she was dodging debt collectors between restaurant shifts. Art should reflect the complexity of the world we actually live in, not just the world we wish existed. As the evening progressed, Zara found herself surrounded by critics, collectors, and artists who wanted to discuss technique, inspiration, and the future of contemporary Korean art. She moved through these conversations with grace that had been hard-won, her education finally given platform to shine, her perspective valued for its authenticity rather than dismissed for her circumstances. When the last guest departed and the gallery staff finished cleaning champagne glasses and removing programs, Miho approached her where she stood before the largest painting in her Skyline series, a canvas that captured Seoul at twilight with bold strokes of purple and gold that seemed to pulse with urban energy. "How does it feel?" he asked, standing beside her to study the painting that had been the first piece she completed in his penthouse studio. "Like the beginning of something I've been preparing for my entire life," she replied. "Like all those years of struggling and saving and dreaming finally make sense." He turned to face her fully, his dark eyes holding expression she had learned to recognize as prelude to moments that would reshape their future. From his jacket pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box that made her breath catch despite the part of her that had been expecting this conversation for weeks. "Marry me," he said simply, opening the box to reveal a ring that was both beautiful and perfectly suited to her taste. "Not because I own you or because protection requires legal binding, but because I want to spend every day for the rest of my life helping you become everything you were meant to be." The ring was stunning, a flawless diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the gallery's lights like captured stars, but it was his words that made tears gather in her eyes. This was not the proposal of a man claiming possession, but of a partner offering equal commitment. "On one condition," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "Name it." "Equal partnership in all business decisions that affect our future. No more protecting me from knowledge." No more handling threats without consultation. If we're building a life together, we build it together completely. His smile was sharp with approval and something that might have been relief. I was hoping you would demand that. A woman strong enough to protect priceless art during a gunfight should not be excluded from strategic planning. She extended her hand, watching as he slipped the ring onto her finger with reverent care. The fit was perfect, as if it had been designed specifically for her, which, knowing Miho's attention to detail, it probably had been. I have conditions too, he said, his voice taking on the formal tone she recognized as his negotiating voice. Such as, I'm transitioning the business toward legitimate enterprises over the next 5 years. Real estate development, art investment, cultural consulting. I want to build an empire worthy of our future children, something that creates rather than destroys. The promise carried weight beyond simple business planning. He was offering to reshape his entire world for her, to transform the dangerous foundations of his power into something that could support the kind of family they both wanted without requiring the next generation to inherit blood along with wealth. I accept your terms, she said solemnly, then broke into a smile that felt like sunrise. And I accept your proposal. Their wedding 3 months later was a reflection of everything they had learned about blending different worlds into something stronger than either could have been alone. The ceremony took place in the gallery space where he had proposed, surrounded by art that represented her dreams made manifest and his support made visible. Her mother flew in from Chicago, nervous but determined to witness her daughter's happiness. His family, initially skeptical of the foreign woman who had captured their son's devotion, were won over by her fluent Korean and her genuine understanding of the responsibility that came with being connected to their name. The vows they exchanged were written together, promises that acknowledged the darkness they had survived and the light they had chosen to build together. When Miho spoke about protecting what was precious to him, his voice carried the weight of someone who had learned that true strength meant creating safety rather than simply eliminating threats. When Zara promised to stand beside him in whatever storms their future might hold, she meant it with the certainty of someone who had already proven herself under fire. 1 year later, Zara stood in the nursery of their new home, a sprawling estate that balanced security with beauty, watching Miho attempt to assemble a crib while their daughter slept peacefully in her temporary bassinet. The man who could dismantle criminal organizations with surgical precision was being defeated by Swedish furniture instructions, and the sight filled her with happiness so profound it felt like physical warmth. You're holding the Allen wrench wrong, she observed, settling into the rocking chair that had been her grandmother's. The Allen wrench is clearly defective, he replied, but his tone carried laughter rather than frustration. Minjin slept on, oblivious to her parents' domestic comedy, her tiny fists curled near her face in an expression of perfect contentment. They had named her for Miho's sister, a way of honoring the tragedy that had brought them together while celebrating the new life that represented their future. She was beautiful, with her father's dark eyes and her mother's expressive features, and she was the first member of the next generation to grow up knowing safety as birthright rather than luxury. Do you ever miss it? Miho asked later that evening as they sat on their terrace watching the sunset paint Seoul's skyline in shades of rose and gold. The simplicity of life before all this complexity. Zara considered the question seriously, thinking about the waitress who had splashed wine on a stranger's expensive suit out of desperate pride and wounded dignity. That woman had been strong, but she had also been alone, unprotected, constantly afraid of the next crisis that might destroy what little security she had managed to build. I missed the person I was becoming despite the circumstances, she said finally. The artist, the dreamer, the woman who refused to be made small by people who saw her as less than human. But I don't miss the fear, the exhaustion, the feeling that I was always one disaster away from losing everything. She looked around their terrace, at the security that was invisible but absolute, at the baby monitor that connected them to their daughter, at the man whose love had transformed from protection into partnership. And I could never miss anything enough to give up this. Us, the family we've built, the empire we're creating, the art that gets made because I don't spend every day just trying to survive. Miho reached for her hand, his thumb stroking over the wedding ring that had joined the engagement ring as symbols of commitment that went far deeper than legal contracts. I used to think power meant the ability to destroy anything that threatened what mattered to me. You've taught me that real power is building something so beautiful and strong that destruction becomes irrelevant. That night, as Zara lay in bed beside her husband listening to their daughter's peaceful breathing through the monitor, she thought about the trajectory that had brought her from a cramped apartment where every day was a battle for survival to this estate, where safety and love and creative fulfillment were simply the foundation upon which larger dreams could be built. She had started as a desperate woman willing to splash wine on a dangerous man's suit because pride was all she had left to lose. She had become a partner, an artist, a mother, and the center of an empire built on protection rather than destruction. The transformation was complete, but the story was ongoing, written each day in the paintings she created, the artists she mentored, the daughter she was raising to understand that strength and gentleness were not opposites, but complementary forces that could reshape the world. In the darkness of their bedroom, Sol's lights visible through windows that had replaced the bullet-scarred glass of his penthouse office, Zara Williams Kong finally understood what safety felt like. Not the absence of danger, but the presence of someone willing to face any threat to keep her dreams alive and flourishing. She had been saved not just from debt collectors and immediate physical danger, but from a future where her talents would have been slowly ground down by the relentless pressure of mere survival. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new ways to grow the empire they were building together. But tonight, surrounded by love that had been tested by violence and proven unbreakable, she slept the deep, peaceful sleep of someone who had finally found home.